Hello and welcome. In this tutorial, we're going to take this horse head that we did for the sculpting tutorial, and we're actually going to make a much better UV mesh for it than it currently has. We're going to look at how to unwrap an organic form. Now, we're not going to be like baking out this object here, like with all the different layers on it. We're going to be prepping UVs so that we can actually bake these, all this additional detail into a texture, right? So we can bake it into either a displacement map, normal map, whatever, so that we can have and affect it, like we can actually use all this information in something, say like a video game engine, where we can't afford to have this many polygons in the scene, but we can, if we have it baked into a texture, it's going to be good enough, right? It's not going to be perfect, but it'll be better than otherwise. It's going to save a lot of memory. We're also going to look at a couple things we can do with some of the settings on the sculpt expression tag, because it's kind of cool, and it helps out a lot when you go to add these things to a scene and you don't want this geometry to disappear or to become part of a texture. Okay, so to start with, let's do the fun things with using deformers and things on here. So before we get into unwrapping this thing, we're going to look at this remesh that we've got, and we're going to select this sculpt expression tag. Now, when I click on the sculpt expression tag, there isn't a whole lot to it. There's basically, I can show the layer manager, I can change the mask color if I have any masks on there, which I don't, and I can freeze it. Now, freezing is the important thing. What's nice, right? As I've said in several tutorials, you right click on any word, go to show help, and it'll tell you exactly what it does and oftentimes why you would want to do it, which is one of the most fantastic things that Maxon offers, I think, is their help menu. Right, it says if it's enabled, sculpt will be switched to special deactivation mode. It's all going to be locked and grayed out, but it reduces the memory that's taken. And then it also makes you use deformers to modify the sculpt objects. So that's what we're going to be looking at. So let's go ahead and we're going to freeze our model real quick, and we're going to allow deformations. And as soon as we've done that, let's go ahead and we're just going to do a bend deformer. It's like the most simple deformer around. And let's make that a child of our remesh. Something to note, right? If I click on these changes here, if I set this to a certain number of degrees, you can already see what's happening, right? It's actually stretching the whole thing, including all this work we've done on in sculpt mode, which is pretty great because that means we could use deformers, say on the caterpillar we did earlier, we could sculpt on top of that mesh that we made, then we could use deformers to change the shape of the body once we have all of that work done, which is pretty cool. But you'll note, right, even though I'm clicking on these different possible orientations or alignments, nothing's happening. And that's because for bend to have, for that to have an impact, we need to fit this to the parent. Once you fit it to the parent, then, at least a second ago, it let me change these and it actually worked. Maybe do I have to click on fit to parent again? Okay, that's weird. So apparently I have to change it and then click fit to parent in order to adjust it to the direction that I want, which is odd. I've used this a lot. I never really realized, ooh, that's nice. I love the X minus. Look at what that does to his face. It makes him so happy, right? So it kind of looks like a hippopotamus at this point. Not that it ever really looked that much like a horse to begin with, but right, so make sure that you do those two steps. I know it trips people, including myself, up a lot. Obviously, the eyes are not going to be warping with this because I don't have them as a child of the remesh, but if I was to make them a child of the remesh, right, and then rotate my view, right, then those eyes are going to be going to be warped in there at the same time. So that's just something that I wanted to show you pretty quickly, is that you can actually freeze this and then do additional deformations and things to the shape while you're doing it. Now, if you were to want to, say, add more detail or something, you'd have to unfreeze it. And I'm pretty sure when you unfreeze it, yeah, it's going to snap back to wherever it was. Obviously, the eyes didn't come with it. They're still being affected by the bend deformer. If I wanted to, I could also just, right, turn the effect of the bend deformer off temporarily until I'm ready to freeze this again. So that's just a heads up. It's a really useful little trick that I wanted to cover before we get into this. Okay, so let's go ahead and pull the eye. Let's delete that bend deformer. Let's pull the eyes out of our head, and let's select this remesh. Now, when I do that, I am currently in UV edit mode, and I have a couple of things on I'm going to turn off so we can see what it should be looking like in your default setup. Is you should be seeing something like this. And if you're in the class, I'll have this head file that I've made uploaded so that you can use this and follow along with this if you're going along at home. Hopefully this is clear enough and the ideas will make sense when we get started. So first, I did freeze the sculpt because, right, we don't need that additional information and those additional calculations happening and memory being used and all of that. So I've got that stopped. I do have this UVW tag, and it's these beautiful polygons here. And so what I need to do is I need to do some of the same steps I've done with, like, when we did the UV unwrapping of solid objects, right? Organic objects are a little bit different. But before we do any unwrapping or anything, I want to show you what this mesh looks like and kind of the nightmare we're dealing with in terms of distortion. So what we need to do is let's go to polygon mode, because what that's going to do is it's going to hide the sculpting stuff. It's going to show us our mesh. If I double click in here, I can select all of those polygons. And then what I want to do is I want to go over to this little arrow. If you have a bigger screen, you might see the textures option, and I'm going to switch to UV map. And then I might go ahead and select off of this just so it's easier to see. So you can see that there's these big polygons that are stretched here, and then there's a bunch of smush stuff on there. And if I go to this other view and zoom in a little bit, you're going to see that this is like the black hole for UVs, right? It's like the gravitational pull of this horse head is warping these UVs in unholy ways, right? You can see that one, it seems radial. They're being stretched in a strange way down there. If I come up here, we've got some areas where there are, right, barely, if I zoom in a little bit here, right, this is so distorted that we can't even make out the text on the UVs, right? There's a lot of distortion in here. And what that means is if I was to apply, say, even a procedural noise to this, I might get areas where it's, you know, reasonably uniform, and then areas where it smears like crazy and is doing strange things. And that's what we're trying to avoid. Now, with organic forms, unlike flat, surfaced, hard objects, we're always going to have some distortion. And our goal in unwrapping this isn't to eliminate distortion completely. It's to remove as much as possible and make the distortion as limited as possible, while still having something that's reasonably easy to paint, right? Or especially if we were doing this where, like, say this was a human head and we were putting like an image of somebody's face on it, right? And we would take, and you'll see examples of that all over the internet if you just search for like UV unwrapped face or something like that. You'll see like an image where it's all warped and bigger on the sides and, you know, smaller and more compact around the facial features. And so, right, that basically is going to be similar to what we're doing, where we're unwrapping this and we're trying to keep it as flat as possible, but we don't want a whole lot of gaps and cuts and weird things happening. We want to minimize that as much as possible while relaxing the mesh as much as we possibly can. So to start with, I'm going to go ahead and say, I'm going to go to set UV from projection. I want to make sure I have my UV tag selected. I'm going to click on this, and I want to make sure that this is set to frontal. And right, and what I did was, sorry, I just said this, but I clicked on the gear by the set UV from projection in order to get to this menu. I'm going to hit OK. And you'll see that now, like, it looks like a horse head back here. That's pretty great. That's where we want to be starting from. Because what was happening at first, if I undo that step, if I select my UV tag, oh, sorry, if I select, oh no, now it's all, never mind. I had done this earlier and it was a different experience. than what I just had. So we're going to ignore what I said. Now I'm just going to set UV from projection again. Okay. So I've got my horse head. I've got my UVs. This is not what I want either, right? These are really not very warped, but if I rotate around, these are the exact same polygons on the other side, or the same UVs on the other side, and then I look at the bottom and things get really unfortunate, right? Because of the way that this is being projected. So I need to start cutting this apart. Now, there's a couple rules with where to make cuts and what's going to help us relax things as much as possible. So first, typically the bottom of nostrils and say eye sockets that will be hidden behind the eyes are a really good spot to start making cuts in terms of cutting things completely out and separate from the rest of the mesh. And that's because they're areas that are usually uniform in color. They tend to be dark, like, right, this would be like kind of black down here in the middle, or a dark brown or something like that. And then behind the eye, we're not really going to see that. So if there's a seam there, it's not so noticeable, right? The other thing with this is we're going to have seams, and seams are not impossible to make really clean, right? Like say I had a seam down the center here, which we're actually going to do in a little bit, right? Painting that, and if this is not uniform in color in any way, getting that to match up where that seam is can be really tricky, even with in-house tools in cinema, the cinema's paint, even in Substance Painter, all of that. Oftentimes the brush is going to sort of like apply on one half, but not quite the same on the other half. And we might have a little bit of an edge there. And what that means, it's not impossible to fix. It just takes a lot more work to do it, right? And we always want to work smarter, not harder when we're modeling, because this is tedious work. It takes time. So the other thing that that you should be aware of is, as you're designing something, like say we were making a whole horse body and it's like a painted horse, right? It's got like white and brown patches on it, right? We would probably want to say not have the seam between a white and brown patch. Like we don't want, say, part of the white patch to overlap on this side of the seam. It would be better if we could have that patch, right, go on one side and not the other, so that we don't have any major color changes happening on that seam, if at all possible. And the other thing is we want the seam to be in the place that's going to be least likely to be seen by the camera, right? So in our case, we're going to be making a cut down the bottom of the jawline all the way along here and up to the back of the head. And then somewhere up on top of the head, we're going to do another cut. And we'll talk about some of the reasons for these things as we go, but we'll probably do a cut here about like kind of where the mane is going to start and where the ears would be laid out, because typically we're going to have some other details there, right, where there's like fluff around the base of the ears and there's other things happening, so that seam can be more hidden, right? But that's kind of the goal, is to hide the seam as much as we possibly can while also relaxing the mesh as much as we possibly can. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at our distortion real quick as it stands. So I'm going to go to my textures here. I'm going to make this an empty canvas so it's easier to see. And then I'm going to go to View. I'm going to go down to Distortion. And you're going to see the areas that are the brightest in red or the brightest in blue, which we don't have a whole lot of blue, just a lot of red. But if it's like truly deep blue, like kind of over here, maybe that's on the side of the head. Let's see. Nope. What that means is that those are the areas of greatest distortion. Some are going to be warped and, right, I can't remember if red is compressed and blue is stretched. I think that's the case, that the more blue it is, the more stretched it is, the more, and then, right, it's compressed on the other side. And our goal is to make these as close to white as possible, right, within reason. So I'm going to go ahead and turn the distortion off because it makes it kind of annoying to see what we're doing. And currently, I don't know where, I think I currently have, you can see I've actually got symmetry turned on from when I was sculpting, and it may just be because I have the sculpt tool selected. So let's see here. Let's go to, I'm going to go to my, can't do path selection right now. Let's go to edges mode. and let's go to path selection tool. And I just want to see if I draw a line. This is not where we're going to make a cut. Okay, so symmetry is still on for me. I'm going to make sure I turn that off because I've found, and maybe there's a way around this that I just haven't figured out yet. But so if I go to standard mode and turn that off and then go back to UV edit, I should be in good shape. But I found that the UV editor doesn't acknowledge the symmetry selection, right? So it'll acknowledge half of it, but it won't acknowledge the other half. And I'm not quite sure why. It may just be something that they haven't implemented yet, or some other bug, or there may be a solid reason for doing that. Okay, so I know for a fact that I am going to be, that I want some of this mouth is going to be its own thing, right? I'm going to maybe color and paint the lips on their own, but the mouth can be separate because it's a natural seam in the scene. And I think I can go with this line here. And so for this, I'm going to go ahead and hit U and L because I'm going to loop select this selection, right? And I'm going to rotate around and make sure that, it's not forward anymore. It's right where I want it to be. That seems like it's going to be okay. All right, so now the trick is that I'm going to continue to add to this selection, right? And so if you ever if I was to accidentally click here and deselect what I had already selected, I'm going to want to undo that. And I'm going to want to continue on. So the tool we're going to mainly be using to do this is our path selection tool. It's under these loop selection things, and it's only really available in points mode or edges mode. It's not available in polygon mode. You can also go up to the select menu at the top of the screen and find it, or you can hit U and M on your keyboard. I'm sure there's other ways to access it too because Cinema does that. And what we're going to do is I'm going to hold down Shift, and I'm just going to click and drag. And what's nice about this is it's going to select these segments as I draw a path, right? So I'm going to go, and what's really important is I want to make sure this is centered because it's going to give me the best possible result. Nothing is perfect, but it will get reasonably close, okay? And so I'm just continuing to add on to this selection. I'm just rotating my view in order to grab these other polygons. And as we do this, I want you to think about how much of a nightmare this would be to do if we had just gone straight from the volume builder without a remesher, and we're trying to zigzag our way across the surface. It's an absolute nightmare. The remesher is saving our lives. And so I'm going to go up again until about where the ears and mane would start, which is probably right about where I'm at. For the purposes of this demonstration, if you're off by one subdivision, it's not going to be the end of the world. And then what I want to do is I want to come down, and I definitely want to cut into where this curve is. And I'm going to go 2 down. This might be problematic. I might actually want to go a little bit further back on the head so it's not so close to the eye. So I'm just going to hold down Control and delete all of those segments. And I might go down one more segment. And this is just experience in doing this a lot. It's going to make life easier if we're not, right on top of that eye. Now, and I may not even need to go this far down. I'm going to go ahead and back that up a little bit. So I'm going to hold Control and click up 1. And then once I've done that, what I want to do is I want to mirror that on the other side. So I'm going to rotate over here and mirror this. And if you ever are unwrapping an orange, unpeeling an orange, you could try and unpeel it with UV unwrapping methods and see what that result is like. It's actually very similar to what we're doing. Okay, so that's going to be our main way to relieve stress on this, is that big cut. But I know from experience that we're going to have some more issues potentially around the nose and everything like that. But we're going to stop there for now, and we're going to unwrap this. And what we're going to do in this tutorial is we're going to go forward and backward a lot. We're going to unwrap it, see the result, and then undo it, make a couple more cuts, unwrap it, see the result, make a couple more cuts, just so you can kind of get this process down. And it's really something that you do. You're going to make more cuts as you go, but things look really weird as you cut. So I don't want to go too crazy with just doing cuts in this view, because you might not know what you're looking at right away. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and click on UV Unwrap. And when I do that, you'll see that I get two UV islands, right? I'm getting the UV island that is my mouth, and then this is my head, right? These are my eye sockets, these are my nostrils, right? That's that front lip part that comes down, and we get what in this case is a pretty good result, right? It's nice and even. Things might change here as soon as I start doing a little bit more work on it, but it's pretty good. So let's go ahead and look at our distortion, right? Already our distortion is substantially better, right? There's like a little bit of distortion here. There's more right around the edges of the mouth. There's a touch here where the bottom of the jaw is, and it's a little bit more red around the back of the head, but right, there isn't a whole lot of detail here. We're not going to be doing, too much work in that area. And then, right, but the nose is something that we may need to deal with because it's pretty red as it stands right now. And the eyes are also red, specifically kind of the areas around the eyes. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and make a couple more cuts. Now, this is such an even mesh at this point that we could potentially do this from this view. We can also leave these cuts set and just add to our selection, but what would be a really great idea at this point is to store our current selection. So let's go ahead and go to Select and Store Selection. All right, so now we've got these edges that we've already cut as a stored selection, and now we can continue to work. So one of the issues with the nose is there's a point in here where this is more of like a spiral. I don't know if you can really see that, but it isn't an even circle. And so that can be a little bit problematic. If we hit U and L on the keyboard to do loop selection, if I go in, you can see, right, things get a little bit weird depending on where I am doing this selection. In my case, this nostril right here, at that point, that's an actual loop, right? And so this is probably where I would want to make this cut. I could also probably go down to this little 6-pack down here, but it looks like it doesn't even want me to do that. It looks like there's one magic ring. So I'm going to go ahead and select that. I want you to note it's selected in the other thing too. I am going to undo that though, because I want to hold down Shift. I just want to add this to my selection. And I'm going to go ahead and select the other one at the same level. Now that I've done that, if I go ahead and if I hit, I can't remember which one's going to work best. It's probably, if I go to UV Weld and Relax, or if I go to Relax here and I make sure I have cut selected edges set and hit Apply, right? Things are a little bit different now, right? It's moved things around, and that's not really what I want to do. So I'm going to go ahead and undo that because I actually like this alignment. I'm going to uncheck this auto realign. I'm going to go ahead and hit Apply again. And you can see, right, it's starting to do strange things when I remove those nostrils, right, which is not my intention. And so this is something where maybe I want to leave those attached for the time being and try a couple other things first, and then see if I can just select those and isolate those islands on their own, and then reduce some tension there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and select my selection thing and just say select. I'm going to click that select button. That's going to get rid of those ring selections in the nostrils. I do want some of this tension relieved here. Now, we've been adding to our selection here, but this is another place where I can relieve that tension. Okay, since that really deformed the mesh, the next thing I could try and do is instead of rewarping this, I can manually select some of these islands or some of these polygons, and I can move them into different places in the mesh, and then I can try and, use the scale tool and things to reduce some of the tension inside the nostrils and on the UV here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to polygon mode. I'm going to make sure I have live selection selected. I'm going to make sure none of the polygons are currently selected at all. And then I'm going to go into my nostrils and I'm going to just start, I'm going to click and drag to start selecting these polygons. And I can reference the other image if I want to. I can figure out, oh, you know, how far do I want to go with this? I'm going to leave it here. This is something where honestly I don't know what the best point is. We're going to go ahead and just see what happens, right? And so I want to do the same exact thing on the other side just to make my life a little easier as I go forward. So this is where it starts. I'm going to hold down Shift and just select all of these inner polygons. I'm going to zoom out a little bit, and I'm going to go ahead and just drag these so they're kind of over here for now. So I'm going to use the Move tool, and since I have just selected these polygons, they're just going to break free from the mesh. Right? They're over here. You'll see now I have these two. They essentially become their own islands that I can select independently. And they're all on their lonesome. So I'm going to select both of those islands, and then I'm going to go ahead and use my scale tool. I could use UV transform too. That basically UV transform has it has move tools set in, it has rotate, and it has transform all kind of built into one. And I want you to note as I expand these a little bit, they get less distorted, right? Now, part of this is, you know, and what that means is they're taking up about the approximate space and size they should take up on their thing. And I don't need these to be completely undistorted, but just a little bit less distortion would be good. Now, the other thing is I want to make sure that this tone more or less matches the inside of my nostrils as well, right? And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use my, I think I can use loop selection in edges mode. And I should be able to select these two edges. I'm going to hold down Shift, make sure I select just the two rings there. Then I can use, in this case, I'm just going to use the scale tool. I think UV transform is going to transform them together and relative to one another, and we want these to be independent. So I'm just going to go ahead and see if that works. Okay, no, it's pulling this in ways that I don't want it to. It also is acting in a way that I don't really want it to act, which means it's separating some of these points. So I'm going to say pin to neighbors. I'm going to uncheck pin to border points, check mark pin to neighbors, and see if this will help. Still, I wonder if that's a problem with my mesh. I don't think it is. Since this is not working for me at all, maybe I'll do one at a time and let's see how that works. So I'm going to go ahead and select one of these. And let's just see if scale works better in this way. Oh, it's because I'm not doing it correctly. If I select the scale tool and come over here, I need to check mark keep neighbor components. If I do this keep neighbor components and then click and drag, there we go. Now it's starting to actually manipulate that mesh. Right? And you can see as I make this smaller and smaller, now the only issue is this one polygon here is getting a little bit warped, but as I continue to shrink this down, you can see that I am getting less warping overall. Now what I might want to do is I might want to use the magnet, right, and just sort of nudge this around a little bit, because you can see if I push in or pull out, things are going to be a little bit smaller. Let's go ahead and try and use this now. I'm just going to shrink this way down. Then I'm going to move it over. And oddly, even though, oh, let's undo that step. Because again, I need to make sure I have keep neighbor components selected. And now I should be able to shrink this down and pull this over some and start to soften a little bit of that. Now this edge here is actually giving me problems, right? Again, this is something where I'm making a lot of mistakes because this is one of those processes that each model is slightly different in how it works and has different requirements. All right, let's try this now that we have all our settings correct. And if I hold down Option, it'll center it. And all this is doing is it's basically just, I'm trying to reduce the intensity of this. Okay, so I've done that one. You know, in this case, I might want to, and I'm going to go ahead and try and do the other one and make it more or less even, right? Again, these are the interior of our, I'm holding down Option and clicking to do the centered scale and pull that down some, right? These are the inside of our objects, so it's not really the end of the world if there's a little bit of distortion in there. We may want to go into points mode. We may want to grab this individual point and maybe use the move tool this time and make sure we have keep neighbor coordinates on here, because then I could pull this out to just sort of blend the intensity of distortion, right? And so I might want to do the same thing on this one where, oops, that's the wrong point. I may just want to try and blend the intensity of this distortion. And if I select this other point here, I might be able to soften things up a bit. I could even bring it on over, right? There's no need for there to be a gap here. So I'm going to select this one, bring this on over too, right? Again, we're just trying to, soften all of that out and reduce the amount of intensity in there. Now, we could also, we could also use the magnet tool to soften some of this up in here. And so if we do that, we can enable soft selection on this. And I think if we go ahead and let's see if we select, like maybe we select 4 of these points here, and we take this magnet and we just start to pull this down. You'll see that it's kind of manipulating the mesh a little bit. I can get a little less distortion towards the bridge of the nose. I'm going to go ahead and do the other, the 4 matching points here. Pull these down as well, get a little bit less distortion there. And then I might want to do it right on the close to the bridge too. All right, so I might want to go to these 4 and use the magnet tool and just click and drag to pull those down and soften that up just a little bit. And again on the other side of the bridge, right? So you kind of get the point that we're going through through these and we're starting to make these more subtle in their distortion, right? It's not going to be perfect, but it's going to be a lot better than it was. I could go through and push and pull this entire mesh, all of these points. I'm not going to go ahead and do that right now. It's just one of the, it's one of those things where you have to determine at what point for your model is it going to be, is having less distortion going to be, are you basically fighting a winning battle or a losing battle, right? Oops, that was not what I wanted to do at all. I think that actually that has soft selection on right now. So you can see I'm actually warping the whole mesh as one. And that can be useful, but in this case, I really wanted to just pull that one point over. And really anywhere where there's major distortion next to each other, if it's something visible, we want to fix that. Okay. So we're in a pretty good spot. And one of the nice things is if we apply a material to this and we're like, whew, that's too distorted, we can always come back and dial it back down. So now the other parts that are really intensely distorted, are the eye sockets. And so let's go ahead and UNL that. And then I'm going to go ahead and go to edges mode because that just seems like the wisest option here. And I thought there was a section where I could actually select the entire thing, but maybe I actually have to do 2 halves, which is weird. Not quite sure why it's acting the way it is. Maybe it's because I've already got those others out. But so I've got that one selected. I'm going to go ahead and go across to the other side. And maybe try and do the same part here. That looks like that. I did that in 2, great. So I'm going to grab those with the move tool. I'm going to make sure the move tool does not have keep neighbor components on, right? If I have keep neighbor components on at this point, and I click and drag, it's going to warp this entire mesh, which is not my intention. So I am going to go ahead and uncheck keep neighbor components, and then just grab, oh, maybe I have to go to I think I have to go to polygon mode and do the selection there. So let's see if I can do UL here and actually get something usable. Okay. And then I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. And then I'm just probably going to use the live selection tool to fill this in. And let's see if this is a better result. Now the other issue is it may, okay, so now it's saying that that's fine. Let's see. I'm going to uncheck enable soft selection. That may have also been my problem, is that soft selection was enabled. Okay, so I've got those separated from the mesh. Let's go ahead and expand these some. Again, it doesn't really matter where I expand these, as long as I get a little bit less tension on there. All right, and so then I can go into edges mode, and I can deselect everything. I can say UL, and I should be able to select this ring now because it is a loop. And then I should be able to select this ring. And I think if I scale these and I make sure that keep neighbor components is checkmarked, I should be able to click and drag, and you can see, right, because I have both of them selected at the same time, they're moving in, which isn't exactly what I want to do. I may enable soft selection as well. And then let's go ahead and try and loop select one of these again on its own. And then let's use this and click and drag. And you can kind of see, right, that's actually doing the opposite of what I want it to do. If I expand this just a little bit, I'm actually getting, right, less tension. I do want to make sure that I'm not adding too much tension elsewhere on the image, but it looks like it's doing a pretty good job. And then down here, I can kind of do the same thing. I can say UL. I could be more precise with this too. I could set certain values or notice how much of a percentage I'm changing this, but right, the whole goal is to try and figure out a way to make a very gentle amount of distortion. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and save this. Now we could go to UV packing, and we can set our target resolution. I have it set to 4096 by 4096. That's pretty good. If I really am wanting something high resolution, I definitely want to go to 8000. And then I want to preserve orientation. I'm not sure if equalize island size is right in this case. So let's just go ahead and hit apply and see what happens. It seems like that resolved everything pretty well. And again, if I come in here and this is too much distortion, I can come back and continue to clean this up and try and maybe stretch the entire nose out a bit to soften all of that. Around these areas in the mouth where it's a little bit heavy, if I go to polygon mode and start pulling on these, or maybe I select a couple polygons here, like the ones that I want to move, but I make sure I have soft selection enabled when I go into magnet mode and keep neighbor components. I don't know why it's not letting me manipulate those. Maybe I didn't have it selected. Interesting. Oh, I can use the move tool effectively to do that. I'm not sure why the magnet tool is deciding not, oh, now it's working. Strange. But you'll see, even though I have enable UV, the soft selection, it's still not working exactly as I would like it to. So I'm not exactly sure why. Oh, maybe I just have to not have stuff selected. That's an interesting thing. But yeah, so I could, right, I can continue to, I could pull and manipulate this. You can see I'm actually making that worse. So you kind of have to figure out like, where is it okay that I have distortion? Where would I like there to be less distortion? And then just play with it and figure out what works best, right? I could, if I made these entire lobes bigger, I could have less distortion around there. You know, there's lots of possibilities for how I could make this move, but we're in a reasonably good spot right now. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. And then let's go ahead and apply our UV map to this image again. And let's go ahead and disable the distortion view so we can just kind of look at what this mesh looks like. Now, if you remember back to the beginning of the tutorial, when things were completely nightmarish, we're in a much better place. You can see, right, these are more stretched out, but everywhere where we're going to have more detail on our image, we have a more uniform size, right? The nose is still a little big. We might want to make adjustments there. But again, that's going to depend on what you're doing in terms of texturing. There's a lot of other factors that determine what you're going to need to work on. And so it's up to you at that point, kind of where you go with it. But this is a reasonably decent, decently unwrapped mesh. I mean, even these lines are, granted they're at angles, but they're lining up. That's pretty fantastic. So yeah, so this is how you do an organic unwrap. Now, this is a pretty simple shape. If you were doing this with, like, say, a human figure or something with arms and legs, you would likely, you want to create seams like we've done at every joint, like at every major joint, like arms connected to torso, legs connected to torso, right? Kind of where seams would land, like for clothing and things like that, whether it's down the inside of the leg or, you know, the inside of the arm. If you look at a shirt with long sleeves, the way sleeves are made is a really good way to unwrap your models. And if there's any other deviations, like say it's a figure that's got some costuming on and there's chunks that are like bigger and chunkier that you really want to like not get warped crazy, separate those out. You can cut that whole thing out if there's like a box or like some sort of piece of tackle or something on their body. You can take that as a separate chunk of polygons, unwrap that on its own like you would a hard object, and then you get a much better mesh that way as well. So this is simple, but then, right, you just have to think about how do you skin a horse, right? How do you skin a human, which is creepy, but how do you cut these things off in a way that makes it lay the flattest? All right, and that's the end of this tutorial.